didn't realize that the people who assigned chairs put me in this session, so I feel like I just had a great advertisement. But it was really a remarkable experience, I have to tell you. They had 400 students that came to this course, and they had to turn away about 200 others. So it spoke to the great enthusiasm on these issues in Nigeria, and to the remarkable organizational abilities of the people in Nigeria to get this event to come on. We will next hear from, from Christy Green.
I hope it doesn't move the others down.
No.
I did this earlier.
It's just the first one.
Oh, okay. Well, it should say 10 points on law and religion in Africa, and you've got the date and the conference and my name below it, which is less essential. The flag is important because I decided what we needed at the end and after lunch was a very bright, maybe he can restore my flag. It was a very bright and colorful African presentation, because that is something I've learned about Africa, the importance of the beautiful colors of the art and the land and the people. And I think we're working now. Okay, so these are points, I should say, that were vetted in some sense by the Steering and Planning Committee, but the expression is my own, so any false offense can be directed at me. And I should say these are a set of points that reflect in some sense where we've been as an organization. I'm going to try to actually work in some points that were made during this conference, and also these aspirations for where we want to go and certain themes that we want to keep in the foreground of our work and scholarship. The first is African, and I was urged to put this first because we're an African consortium, but it raises an important question of our project and our goals and our aims. And the question is one that has come up actually in editing some of the articles for the publications that I've done, and it usually has two different manifestations. One has to do with Western, US, European scholars presuming, like me when I write on Africa, to comment on Africa. The other has to do with African scholars who use Western scholarship and engage with Western scholarship. So there were two examples that were actually in the first section of the volume you have before you, and they reflect two different responses. George Biarugaba originally had a paper that focused on a number of European Catholic theologians, and I gave him the invitation to make it more African, to say something about what these various sources have to say about Africa. And he actually accepted that invitation and did a substantial rewriting of his article, bringing in all of these African voices, theologians I hadn't even heard of. So that was wonderful, but that's just one response. Now, with John Paul, I said, you're reading John Rawls through Kenyan eyes, but can you make the connection between John Rawls and Africa? And he said, that's something I'm working on, but right now I'm working on the reading Rawls as an African part. I shared him the story told me by a professor of mine once who worked at a university and an English department, was very excited about the possibility to hire an African-American male professor. This is an underrepresented demographic in the American Academy. There was just one problem. His specialty was 19th century British women novelists, and they were hiring him with the idea that he would teach African-American stuff. So I think there was an arrangement where he agreed to do some of that while also teaching courses in a specialty. But it does raise these questions of identity and academic freedom, and shouldn't Westerners be invited to comment on Africa, and shouldn't African scholars be invited to dialogue with Western sources. That said, we do want to emphasize that we are working on an African consortium for law and religious studies, and so we really have a very strong interest in distinctively African presentations. That's probably the longest one. I'm going to go through these a bit more quickly. Christianity and Islam. There was a discussion, a kind of heated discussion at our Ghana conference that emerged about this perennial question of, are Christianity and Islam imported religions? I first heard this idea almost 2 decades ago from the Kenyan legal scholar Makau Wamatua, who was speaking at Emory on this and actually made that argument. I thought at the time, I can't imagine that African Christians and African Muslims wouldn't want to take issue with that because they've got their own versions. They're not merely products or vestiges of colonialism, but Africans have appropriated and innovated and developed their own versions of these religions. So something to keep in mind, this imported versus African. Indigenous, independent, and ATR, and I should say I was urged to add ATR, particularly for Nakazola Mendende, who would have insisted that I do it. And I'm told that I shouldn't actually put ATR on the same slide with indigenous churches and independent churches. But these are the real Africans, if that's what we're looking for. So we always want to keep in mind what is the status of African traditional religions and the African independent or indigenous churches. Peter Kurtzen has been trying to school me in what those two different terms mean. But another question to possibly ask in this area, are these wholly indigenous traditions, or are they importantly syncretized with Christianity, Islam, and other traditions? And I think we've heard some references to that in some of the presentations today. Secularism. Has secularism happened in Africa? That's a question that some ask. The two pictures here are a classic issue of Time magazine from 1966 with the emergence of the God is Dead movement. And the one on the bottom is by the editors of The Economist magazine called God is Back. And some say God never left. Africa has not become secularized, but the question is it happening today? I told the steering committee in formulating the index for the volume you have before you that there were a striking number of references to secularism across the chapters in our South Africa conference. And I've heard many more references today. So is secularism something that's going on here? And what does secularism or even post-secularism mean in an African context? Culture and custom. This religion versus culture question constantly rears its head in this field. What is the difference between the two? How are they related? My emphasis and interest here is how does customary law relate to secular and religious law in Africa. I learned so much from the Digby Koyana paper in this volume, and also Jean-Paul Sarrou, and this gets to the ATR question as well, comparing the role of women in ATR and the Roman Catholic tradition. But this area of customary law is very hot. I can tell you, having just formulated our list of books to review for the Journal of Law and Religion, we've identified a number in that area around the world, from Africa to New Zealand, that seem to represent something of a trend. And that seems to be something that we could be on the forefront of here. Race and ethnicity. Those are the bones of victims of the Rwandan genocide at the Nadarama Church. This is an important question, especially at the 20th anniversary of that genocide. What is the relationship between religion, race, and ethnicity in Africa? What is it, and there's a little typo in there, what does it mean to label conflicts as ethnic or political instead of religious? Sorry, I'll have to change that one for the final version. I've been doing a lot of work on religion and conflict lately, and one of the themes that is repeated like a mantra throughout that literature, especially in the social sciences, political sciences, public policies, that these conflicts are ethnic or political. They never want to admit that they're religious. So how to admit that they're religious and understand that religious dimension and how it relates to the other categories is important. And I think these African experiences of race and religion and ethnicity might also be able to inform global discussions of race, ethnicity, and religion. Gender and sexuality, another perennial issue. How does religion shape gender and sexuality debates in Africa? I actually did a short encyclopedia article for an Oxford book on the Bible and law, and I had quite a bit of reference to the attempts to use the Bible to justify laws against homosexuality. In fact, the editor said, "You're focusing too much on the homosexual thing." And I said, "I can't help it. That's what the Bible is being used for." So we need to think about this. And how do debates in Africa relate to similar debates around the world? I mean, in the Ugandan situation, there were questions of this being actually an American agenda that was being pushed in Uganda by Americans. But we can have a discussion of how those relate. And finally, What can we do to bring more African women scholars and practitioners to ACLARS? I think it's wonderful. We see more feminine faces around the table this time than at any previous conference. We almost have enough for an ACLARS Women's Caucus, but we should increase that. And that's not just a women's issue. It involves men as well. You all are teaching. Some of you have sharp women students and colleagues. I posted something on my Facebook account within the last year, I think, an article about how women scholars don't cite themselves enough. And consequently, when the citations are tallied, as many of these scholarly tools do these days, they don't come up as being cited very heavily. And I think that's where the encouragement of young women scholars by senior scholars of both sexes to participate in an organization like this is important. Religious freedom, we've been talking quite a bit about it today. I think Ashley, our Swedish colleague, Hans Ingvar Roth, have made reference to this, but the idea of religious freedom is sort of contested in the West. There's a very influential group of scholars led by Winifred Fowler Sullivan at Indiana University. She wrote a book called The Impossibility of Religious Freedom, focusing particularly on what judges and the law do when they decide who or what counts as religious and how to adjudicate their disputes. But it's become this wider question of the politics of religious freedom. Some say that it's a Protestant, a Western, it's usually Protestant Christian or colonial hegemonic import, or even something that's forced, an idea that's forced. I don't think it's forced. I'm hearing ideas around the table of African sources and resources for religious freedom, and that might be something that we want to contribute to that debate. Last two here, religious pluralism, what's the state of it in Africa? Where is pluralism problematic, contested, and violent? But perhaps importantly too, to focus on the positive side, where religious pluralism seems to be working effectively in Africa, where it is, and what lessons that might impart to the world. And finally, social media. Rosalind Hackett and I are both avid social media fans. If you go onto my Twitter site, if you get onto the internet, you will see that I've actually posted as my top posted pin something referencing hashtag ACLARS 2015. So if any of you all want to get on Twitter and raise questions, comments about the conference, you can do so there. Facebook can also be very good. There's a new Religion and Conflict Facebook page, Religion and Conflict News and History, that has become something of a focal point for us working in that area. LinkedIn, I'm linked to many of you already. I'll be trying to link to some new people among you after the conference, but it has been a way for me to keep in touch with you all and where you're going professionally. The last two here, academia.edu. This is a place where you can post your papers, your academic profiles. It's very global. It is a place where I posted a link to the African Human Rights Law Journal 2008 issue that Johan Vanderwever and I did. For a long time, the first 3 years that I had this website, I was on this website, it was the top article every measuring period, week, month. More than 3,800 people have seen that issue or clicked on it at last count, many of them Africans. So these websites can be powerful vehicles. Social Science Research Network is one that's widely used in law in the U.S. among law scholars. I'm not sure how international it has become, but it should be more international, I'm sure. So that's another vehicle. So I will be sending you, as soon as I get it, a link from Sun Press with the link to their page on our book. I encourage you to distribute that widely, distribute the website. There's our book. That's what I'll be sending you information on. And ACLARS, our website, make that known to people as well. And that's under development, I understand, and we expect it to be a real hub for the organization in the future. And that is it from me. Thank you.
Now, as you can sense, part of the aim of this session has been to have people thinking a little bit about the field, about where we're going, and also where we've been during this conference. And in that regard, we've asked, I'm going to announce three, I want to give the final word to Nico, but three sort of brief comments from different perspectives on the conference. So first, Imam Muhammad Ngumbo Matthews, who has been with us during much of the conference. He's the General Secretary of the Namibia Islamic Judicial